Hello again, everyone. My name is Noelle Murphy. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Associate Dean of a college at Bennington, and I'd like to extend yet another warm welcome to the college. We're so thrilled that you'll be joining us on campus this fall. We're working with some great enthusiasm and excitement, getting ready to welcome you. And I'm so glad that you've joined us this evening in order to learn a bit more about academic life at Bennington and the array of academic supports that we offer, which of course includes our process for requesting and approving academic accommodations. As I know, as I'm sure you're feeling quite intensely right now, you're about to embark on an exciting and challenging new stage of your education. And I hope that our time together this evening helps you just to get a better sense of how we all work together on campus, faculty, staff, and students, to support your academic, creative, intellectual pursuits and fulfillment, and ultimately work toward your academic success at the college. So we do offer a robust array and system of academic support for our students. And my colleagues here on the screen are here to tell you a bit about their work. So I will, of course, let them introduce themselves, but just quickly, I'll mention Kate Child, our Associate Dean of Academic Services, and Katie Evans, the Director of Academic Services, are here tonight and are looking forward to helping you better understand how we work with students in their first year and beyond. I'm also quite happy to say that Lua Piovana Marcotte, class of 2023, has joined us tonight to share a bit about her experiences as a student. And in particular, we're hoping she would share some of her experiences as a student who has utilized the resources on campus in a really exemplary way. So I'm going to turn things over to them, to Kate, Katie, and Lua, who will tell you more about their work and their experiences. And then we will spend a good bit of time nearer the end of our conversation together tonight answering your questions. So please feel free to submit any questions that you have, for those of you who did not submit them in advance, which is totally fine, through the Q&A function on the webinar. And I will monitor those and then field those questions to the panelists today. So with that, I'll turn things over to Kate.
Myself. Hello, welcome. I am very excited to be here with you this evening. Some of you I interacted with on Tuesday and I welcomed you then, but I will just keep welcoming you to Bennington. As Noelle said, my name is Kate Child. I use she, her pronouns. And in academic services, I would say my work focuses on supporting incoming students and families. Some over the summer, like I said, we worked on course registration. We're already talking about that together. And then certainly as you transition to Bennington and during your first year on campus. And I would say my work focuses on the student academic experience and how as we as a college support that experience. You know, I also work with international students. So if any of you here are international students, we will, you know, you will get emails from Rage and me, and we're really excited to work with you over the next 4 years. And I would say, in addition, the third group that I kind of work with on campus are our FLOW students, and that at Bennington, that stands for first generation college students, low income people who identify or come from a low income background, and working class. And so I see myself as a first generation college student. Neither of my parents attended or graduated from a 4-year residential institution. And we would have called ourselves working class growing up. So if any of that resonates with you, just know that, you know, I'm someone on campus who might understand a little bit, you know, about your unique situation. And I will pass it to Katie and Lua.
Thanks, Kate. Hi, everybody. And I'm just going to echo my colleagues to say how excited I am to to welcome you and to start working with you on this long journey through Bennington, although really it ends up not feeling so long in the end. My name's Katie Evans. I use she, her pronouns. I'm Director of Academic Services, and my focus and my work really centers on general academic support with sophomores, juniors, and seniors. So, there's an office of academic services that picks up where Kate leaves and her team leaves off to provide support through the next 3 years. And I also do help coordinate academic accommodations on campus for students with disabilities or other limiting conditions. And that can also include temporary accommodations for sort of unexpected medical or health emergencies. And so before I sort of dive into accommodation stuff, I'm gonna invite Lua to also introduce herself.
Yeah, I'm Lua. I use she, her pronouns. I will be a senior in the fall, and I'm studying sort of interdisciplinarily in the social sciences, focusing on disability studies and queer studies in a rural context. I am a student who has academic accommodations. I do some disability, like community support and advocacy stuff on campus with other students. And in the fall, I will be one of the first year forum co-leaders as well.
Thank you so much, Katie and Lua. And I wanted to take this opportunity to introduce our colleague, Christine, who was able to join us tonight. Christine, we're just doing introductions for the folks who are listening in on the webinar. Would you take a minute to introduce yourself and share a bit about your work?
Sure. I am Christine Congelosi Lala. I use she, her pronouns. I have been with the college for, this is my 6th academic year, and I started the Assistant Director of Residential Life position in January. So I'm still learning quite a bit. I deal mostly with housing assignments, and ADA accommodations for housing assignments. And I also work with the house chairs, which are student leaders, a pair in each house. So I work with them and also do a little bit of community events around campus and so on and so forth. So I dabble in a little bit and I'm learning a lot.
Thank you so much, Christine. So I'll send things back to Kate so she can give us all a bit of an overview of the work of academic services in supporting first-year students.
All right. So Lua mentioned briefly that she'll be a first year forum co-leader in the fall. So I'm going to start there. And Lua, you might be able to say a little bit more as someone who went through the first year forum and liked it enough that you decided to take a leadership role in the fall. But I'll kick us off by saying that First Year Forum is an advising seminar, and it's meant to prepare first year students for success at Bennington. Sometimes I think of it as a way to extend orientation, although it's a lot more than that. But you don't have to worry about getting every bit of information in those first few days on campus, because you're going to have a regular class meeting time. We're going to get information about being a Bennington student and engage with some of the concepts that we wrestle with here on a weekly basis. Sections are typically about 20 students, and they're led by an instructor who also serves as the student's faculty advisor. And it's co-led by an upper class student or a senior like Lua, who's called the First Year Forum co-leader. So this small cohort meets once a week, and hopefully becomes, kind of close knit, a place where it's comfortable to talk about what's going well and maybe what challenges you're facing. And that's the beauty of having a co-leader, a student in the class who can really talk about, the on the ground experience of navigating, Bennington. And there's also a workshop component where students are able to engage with upper class students. So the co-leaders will offer workshops, faculty will offer workshops, and then some of us, the different resources on campus, the staff who lead those resources will offer workshops as well. So again, meant to help you get connected with the different people and resources on campus that will make Bennington, what it is for you. So in addition, one final thing for me, actually, Lua, before I go into academic services, is there anything you would add about First Year Forum?
Yeah, I mean, I think from like current students and current freshmen, and when I was a freshman, First Year Forum definitely gets like mixed reviews from students, but I think most people come out of it finding that overall, if nothing else, it is a really valuable experience to have that time with your advisor and your co-leader every week, just so you can start like forming relationships with faculty and upperclassmen who can sort of help you on your path through Bennington.
Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate that. Okay, so then I also wanted to say, in addition to having a faculty advisor, a upper class co-leader who you're seeing on a regular basis in class, also in one-on-one or small group meetings, all incoming students also have access to someone in academic services who specifically works with first year students. So someone like me, we have a few other staff members in academic services who specialize in working with first year students as well. And we're meant to be an extra layer of support, so some students meet with someone in academic services weekly. Some, it may be just once or twice a term, as needed. Some only want to engage with us over email. Everything is fine. Any way that you want to engage, just know that we are here. And, sometimes we're working with students on time management, organization, kind of keeping track of, where you need to be and when, breaking down larger projects into, more manageable chunks, utilizing resources. We're really great, you can come and talk to us about what's going on, and we'll say, maybe a conversation with this person, or maybe utilizing the writing tutors would be really helpful, and we can help you get connected and get to know everything that's offered here. So yeah, I think I'll pass it back to Noelle, and you can fill in any gaps if I forgot or missed anything there.
No, that was fantastic, Kate. Thank you. I will just add that if you are not a first year student on this call, and that you will be entering Bennington as a transfer student who has already completed their first year of college somewhere else, that you will have the support, not necessarily a first year forum, but you will have a designated point person in academic services who will support your progress through the college, as well as all students do, a faculty advisor who is able to speak to your academic interests, help you navigate being a student in a new educational setting. And for those of you who are third term standing or more advanced, help you to develop your ideas that will become the basis of your plan. So just know that though the structure is a little bit different, the kinds of supports and the kinds of things you can work on with your faculty advisor and your support person in academic services are the same. And at this stage, I'll turn things over now to Katie and Lua to talk a little bit about academic accommodations at the college.
Nice, thanks, Noelle. So because I like to have something text-based to focus on while I'm hearing about things, I'm going to share my screen with you and just show you a few slides as I'm talking. If the Zoom gods are with me, I think you all can see that. And let me just start the slideshow. It's coming. There we go. Okay. So again, I'm Katie. And I just wanted to introduce you to how we think about accommodations at Bennington, because it can be different from folks' high school experiences or experiences at previous institutions. So accommodations are really, they're supports and services or modifications that are designed to ensure equal access to the college's programs and facilities for students who have a documented disability. And really, this is just one part of a larger web of support that Kate and Noelle have talked about. But like so much else at Bennington, it's really student-driven, it's really interactive, and it's really collaborative. So it's not sort of just oh, let's fill out this form and we'll issue you your formal letter and then we're done. I think of it as a process of getting to know you as a student, your strengths and your challenges, and also sharing information with you about how academic life is at Bennington, the types of courses you might experience or encounter, the relationships that you build with faculty, the role that your faculty advisor can play in helping guide you through your education. So because I'm sort of grounded in academic services, and I can bring that context and my knowledge of sort of the broader academic experience to the accommodations process, we can really dig in together to address the challenges that you might have because of your disability or limiting condition. And really what the process looks like, you'll probably be interested to know that too. It does start with the form and your documentation. You should have received this with sort of the welcome pages, but I'll also throw in the chat a link to our accommodations and support website where you can find all of this information in the form as well. The form itself, there's a section for students to fill out. I call that page 2 because it, shocker, is page 2. And that's where students get to identify what accommodations they're looking for and what and for what reason. And then the remainder of the form, pages 3 and 4, you'll see are the documentation form. And that's for a licensed healthcare professional, therapist, doctor, psychiatrist, for them to fill out. And why we ask for that documentation is both to verify the diagnosis and also to share their professional perspective on the limitations that your condition causes for you, how often these limitations occur and how severe they are, and also their recommendations for what accommodations they feel like will help mitigate the barriers that you might experience in a college setting. And just a note about documentation for academic accommodations, depending on the disability or limiting condition you're seeking accommodations for, we can also work with, let's say, a neuropsychological assessment or a psychoeducational testing report that you might have had done within, the last few years. That is really helpful information. I know those reports can be quite long and involved, and I love getting all of that because, again, like I said, it's a real learning experience for me about who you are, who the student is as a learner, like strengths and challenges in all sorts of ways. And any context you can provide and any information is really helpful in that learning process for me personally. And I'll let Christine to talk about the documentation requirements for housing accommodations, because oftentimes neuropsych assessments don't really address social or housing needs. So with that form, that sort of launches the process. And then over the summer, I'll be getting in touch with you to schedule our initial conversation. And this can be a voice or video call. If you're on campus over the summer, we can do it in person, but usually it's a voice or a video call. And this can take, anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour. Again, this is really just my chance to get to know you and to also share a lot of information. And so I'll be asking all sorts of questions about sort of what you're interested in, like, how do you manage these types of assignments? What is this experience like in the classroom? Oh, what have you done before to address this issue or challenge? And then we can really think together about what the supports are that you're going to need at Bennington specifically. And those supports can include, of course, formal accommodations, but they can also, as Kate mentioned, include time management and organizational support, someone to talk to on a weekly basis just to, hold you accountable and keep that momentum going, or to refer you to other resources on campus. Those supports can also include our, counseling and psychological services office, our health services office, the writing tutors, the math tutors, your faculty advisor, and your faculty who offer sort of weekly office hours and who really are available to talk through assignments and material with you. And so then once we have that initial conversation, what I do is I sort of take all the information, look at what you're requesting, look at what our sort of fundamental expectations are as a student at Bennington. And then we come up with the approved accommodations. And then you will receive an official accommodations letter and a memo. And the memo is addressed to your faculty, but it doesn't automatically go to your faculty. You will get a PDF version of this, and that PDF you can use that throughout your entire time at Bennington. For academic accommodations, you don't need to renew every year, every term, right? Once you're approved, that's in place for your entire time at Bennington. Housing accommodations and ESA accommodations work differently. So I'll let Christine talk to that. And so once you get your letter and memo, you're approved, that's on file. There's no confidential information that's included in the letter and memo. It just outlines your approved accommodations and gives some guidance on how to implement them. Then when the term begins, and I'll walk you through all of this, at the beginning of the term and in our initial conversation. So don't feel like you have to remember all this now. But at the beginning of the term is typically when students then notify their faculty that they do have accommodations. And we can go over your schedule together, or you can do that with your faculty advisor or somebody else in first year experience academic services, and say, oh yeah, here's a class where I know I'm going to need my accommodation for extended time on tests, or I know I'm going to need my accommodation for note-taking support. And then you would make sure that your faculty gets a copy of your memo, and that you schedule some time to talk with them about the logistics and the details of how that accommodation can be implemented. And of course, the first time through, it's going to seem a little overwhelming. It's going to maybe feel uncomfortable depending on where you're at on that spectrum of self-advocacy. But our goal, like so much at Bennington, is to really foster that self-determination in you. Like, we want you to get to the point where you can articulate your needs and you can share that with other people and collaborate that with them to arrive at the place you want to be, to achieve your goals. And we're all on your team, rooting you on, and also offering some more practical support of, like, if you need help sort of starting that conversation with faculty or notifying them, or thinking through maybe an accommodation isn't exactly what you thought it was going to be, and can we think about other supports or strategies that could help fill in the gap. All of that stuff is areas that I can support you with throughout your entire time at Bennington. But I know the first year especially is a time of learning, and we're in it together. So I really encourage you to keep in touch with me throughout, especially this first year, as you're getting used to how it all works. So again, here's my email. I'll throw this link in the chat, or I can share it somehow technologically. I don't know if we can chat with you, but here's the link to the accommodations and support website. It is, easy to find if you go to the Bennington homepage and search accommodations or accommodations and support. And it includes information there, not just on academic accommodations, but also on housing accommodations. So with that, I might ask Christine, if you wanted to add anything, if there's anything that was different about the housing process that you wanted to highlight.
Yes, actually, we use the same form that Katie has been describing, but just in the accommodation request, you would write medical single or ESA. And the Bennington community considers residential living a big part of the students' education. So we really encourage students to have roommates and so on and so forth. And sometimes it's not possible, but we strongly encourage that. Because first years and second years and some third years usually have to double up depending on the number of students on campus, but usually seniors are allowed single rooms. So that is not part of the medical single process, but it's just how things evolve when you get here. So what we do is we take that form when you filled it out with your doctor's documentation and such, and then we share that information with an off-campus consultant who specializes in higher education, medical academic supports, and she meets with you and then she gives us a recommendation. The college has the final say on that recommendation, but that's how it goes. And then depending on the availability, like if you did an academic or a medical single request in the middle of the term, even if you were approved for medical single, we might not be able to provide you one depending on our space. So usually not the sooner the better, but getting your documents in at a reasonable time does help the process. And again, all of this information is on the website. We are updating information. And what we are going to do is, if you were assigned a medical single for 1 year, we ask you to fill out another form to renew your application. It's not as extensive as the first one. It's more of a personal narrative to hear how the student is dealing with their accommodation, how it is working, how they have any changes, and so on and so forth. But the initial application is exactly like the one that Katie was describing. And any questions or about this, you could send emails to housing@bennington.edu, and I'd be happy to help with any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christine and Katie. Lua, would you like to share what a bit about your experience as a student who has engaged in some of these processes?
Yeah, for sure. I have accommodations for things like extended time on tests and in-class writing assignments and being able to go to a separate space for that. And I've had these actually just in place my junior year. So I did not have them before that. So I kind of came into the process late. And I think something that a lot of people I've talked to deal with, like some people come in having had accommodations before, knowing exactly what they need. Some people come in knowing that they would be eligible for accommodations and accommodations could probably really help them, but not knowing what the possibilities are and like what exactly they can request. And so if that sounds like you, I would really recommend talking to academic services about what accommodations can look like, because there are a lot of different things that can happen. I had different accommodations in my freshman year. For something else, I had a campus job that was too physically harsh on my body with like a chronic health condition. And because it was an assigned first year federal work study job, I was able to go through accommodations to be placed in a different job, which I think is not a super common situation, but it happened for me. So accommodations can happen in a variety of ways. And if you aren't sure what to do, reach out.
No, I think that's great, Lua. And it reminds me that I meant to highlight that that we do it a little differently at Bennington, where we don't have a centralized disability services office that would review all accommodations requests. You know, academics is through academic services, housing is through student life and Christine, and then campus employment accommodations is through our fieldwork term and career development office, who oversees sort of campus jobs. But yes, a conversation is never a bad place to start, because we can think together about, yeah, what are the accommodations that you need in this instance.
That's great, Katie. Thank you. And I believe that addresses one of the questions that's come through on the Q&A, which was where and how do you submit your request for accommodations? And so just submitting them via email is fine to the correct office, right? So academic accommodations go to Katie. Housing accommodations would go to Christine or to housing@bennington.edu. And if there are workplace-based accommodations, we can help point you in the right direction there as well. And we can pop our email addresses in the chat as we go on this evening as well. And another attendee asked a question that really, I think, speaks to Lua's experience. And so maybe Lua and Katie, you could both respond here. Someone asked if we're feeling like you're okay without accommodations, but then realize later that you need them. What should you do? How should you handle that?
I mean, for me, I just applied them for them in the same way that anyone else would apply for them. You don't have to start this process before coming to Bennington if you feel like you don't need anything, but then you realize you do. You can pretty much start the process later on whenever. It's not like if you don't get accommodations now, you're locked out of them forever.
Totally. I work with students in every cohort. I will say that also the thing about accommodations in college, because it is so student-centered and because you get your memo and your faculty don't get your memo automatically, that you can apply for accommodations and they can be on file, and then you can make that intentional decision about when and how you use them, so that they're there if you need them and you don't need to then start the process and track down documentation, but you are still in charge of how you share that information and when you use them. It's also important to note that accommodations aren't retroactive. So if you do end up beginning a term or a course, and about halfway through you realize oh man, yeah, there's tests and I need extended time, or oh man, I'm missing a lot of what is going on in class. I could really use that ability to record class sessions and review them later. Right? We can't go back and sort of redo those tests or redo those class sessions and make sure that you have those accommodations. So just in terms of being able to really get on that train when you need to, I would say take care of that paperwork over the summer so that they're there for you. But yeah, totally. And, it's really student driven, so you can really decide for yourself.
That's great, thank you. There have been a couple of questions that all relate to the idea of documentation, right? So some participant asked if you have to have had an IEP in high school in order to request accommodations at Bennington. And then there was also a question quite specifically about a concern about being able to get a specialist to provide documentation in support of their accommodations request. Just in an acknowledgement that it can sometimes be quite difficult to access specialist care, especially on a quick turnaround time. And in that circumstance, would documentation from a primary care physician suffice? So Katie, would you like to start fielding those questions?
And remind me, the first one was about the IEP. Is that
Yeah, do you
correct?
need to have had an IEP in order to request accommodations?
Yes, and the answer is no. IEPs, again, are helpful informational, resources for us as we're determining your accommodations at Bennington. But the IEP on its own does not ensure that you'll be approved for accommodations at Bennington. It's a new process. So if you have an IEP, that probably means that you have some experience with accommodations and can maybe, like Lua said, like maybe know what you need a little bit more, but you don't need to have had an IEP to start the process at Bennington. We can go with the documentation form on the accommodation request form and gather that documentation in other ways. And then the question about getting in to see a specialist, and sort of that's usually, I would say, like the slowest part of the request process is the, gathering that documentation and that paperwork from healthcare providers. So I think to make it easier is we do accept documentation from any licensed healthcare professional who's familiar with your condition. So it could be your primary care physician, could be your therapist, could be a specialist if you already have a relationship with one, anyone who can really speak to the impact of your disability or limiting condition. And there's a wide range of documentation we receive. Like I said, the more detailed, the better for me, but some physicians can really only speak in limited terms, and that's a great place to start. And we'll take a look and see if we need any additional information. And then maybe as we're getting it, we can do temporary or provisional accommodations, at least on the academic side, for like a one-term situation while you're gathering more documentation too.
Thanks, Katie. I'd like to shift gears just a little bit for a moment. We had a question about academic advisors. And Kate, I was hoping you might be able to respond with some general information about how and when a student learns about their academic advisor.
It would be my pleasure. So over the summer, students who have questions about anything related to academic life at Bennington, you can email academicservices@bennington.edu, and I will reply, or someone who kind of specializes in working with new students, be it transfer students or incoming first-year students, will reply. We can get on Zoom calls, we can get on phone calls, or we can chat through emails. So you should have a lot of support this summer when it comes to thinking about course registration or anything else that really, you might look for from a faculty advisor. And then in August, just before the term begins, you and your faculty advisor will be matched up, and you'll both receive information at the same time saying, you're going to work together over the course of this first year in that advisor-advisee relationship in first year forum. Your advisor will start, reading your application materials and doing what they can to kind of prepare and get to know you. And then, and the same for you. You'll be shared, this is their office, this is their phone number, email, you'll set up an initial meeting and you'll talk before the term begins one-on-one. And you'll also, during orientation, we call it class 0 and class 1 for first year forum. I don't know why we still call it class 0, but you'll have times where you'll meet as a first year forum class before the official first day of classes even begin. And on top of that, you will also have time one-on-one or in a classroom with a cohort of people in your class to meet with your co-leader. So you'll get time to really get to know each part of your kind of advising team intimately before classes even begin. It's exciting.
Great, thanks, Kate. Before this session this evening, we got a really specific question that I love as an entry point into some larger conversations about what students can expect in the classroom, generally speaking, at Bennington. So one participant was wondering how often faculty members give timed tests. And so Lua, I'd love to hear if you've ever had to take a timed test. And I think Katie and Kate, this gives us a chance to talk a little bit about what to expect, but also like what might accommodations look like if someone has a particular challenge around time exams. Lua, have you ever taken a timed test at Bennington?
Yes.
Yeah.
There are timed tests in my statistics class, and I've also had them in Italian language classes. And I think they come up more in STEM classes and language classes, as far as I know. I know like for art history, sometimes there are exams for that too. But yes, I've had timed tests. The ones I've had, like the time limit, even without accommodations, has never been super strict. So if people like run a little over and end up staying late, it's like not a huge deal. It's not like for the tests I've taken, it's not like, oh, it's been 1 hour. Turn off your computers or put your pencils away now. But yeah, they do exist. And faculty so far for me have been pretty good about extended time on those tests.
Kate or Katie, do you want to jump in to give your thoughts on like generally what to expect in the classroom?
I guess I would say that most classrooms at Bennington we would consider seminar style, even classes that you might think would be more traditional for a lecture. Faculty often will try to make sure that the classes are really student driven and allowing a lot of time for students to engage in discussion together and with the faculty member as they grapple with the material. I think that it's common to have group work assigned, so you might work with a group, choose a topic that you want to organize around. The faculty will give you some prompts, but they'll give you a lot of freedom to interpret the prompts and to then bring your interests into the whatever the assignment is. And then as a group, you might do research together, you might write a paper together, you might have a presentation back to the class together. I think that's quite common in classrooms at Bennington. I also think that writing papers is quite common, and they can be a range, from weekly responses in a forum like Discord or Slack, or turning them in directly through email or Google Doc to the faculty member. And then they could be also more formal, we'd like you to write a 3-page paper or a 5 to 7 page paper, maybe a 10-page paper, right? Depending on the class and depending on what the faculty is looking for. And then, of course, as Lewis said, there are tests, depending on, and sometimes there's tests in a literature class, right? There might be a quiz, a reading comprehension quiz, or, in classes that you might think more traditionally, like a science class, for example. And I think, so if you think you could need extra time, I would absolutely request an accommodation for extended time on tests or testing in an alternative setting, just in case. You might never use it, but at least it's there for you, and then you're not in a position where you think, oh my gosh, there's a test, I didn't expect it. really know I could do much better if I was in a quiet setting, if I knew I had the time I was going to need on this, but I never requested that accommodation. So I guess I can't ask for it. Right. You know, I feel like I run into that with students. So to me, you know, I know the question was already asked and answered about what if I'm not sure I need them now, you know, should I just ask later? And I really just want to emphasize what Katie was saying, that the information you share with Katie is you get to dictate, you know, if your faculty ever know anything about your accommodations or not. And I think it's common for students, you know, maybe you have an accommodation for extended time on tests, but you're in a painting class and you're not going to have a test, you know, and so they choose not to share their accommodations with their painting instructor. So I think just knowing that you're really in the driver's seat, but that accommodations are not retroactive. And so I think when students decide midway through a term that they do need accommodations, it feels urgent. And so at that point, to be able to pull out the memo and say, from here forward, I want to utilize my accommodations in this class. It saves you some precious time. So, and if nothing else, you get to really discuss your unique learning style with Katie, which I wish all of us thought more about our unique learning styles. And I'll cut myself off there.
Thanks, Kate. Katie, anything to add?
I would just say too that at Bennington, approximately 20% of our students are registered for accommodations. So if you think about that in a classroom, you would not be alone in that class in needing accommodations. Of course, everyone has different accommodations, and so it wouldn't necessarily mean that you and a classmate would have the same ones. But faculty encounter accommodations quite frequently, and they are not, you know, they're not surprised or caught off guard. Usually, maybe Lua can talk to that too. When someone presents them with a memo and notifies them that they need extended time on a test. So, for instance, so faculty, you know, are also able to respond in a way that I hope you would think would not be judgmental. But I don't know, that maybe we don't want to get into that, Lua, but I guess I'm curious, like, how you feel faculty respond if you notify them of your accommodations.
I would say overall pretty well. Most faculty are just pretty respectful and they know the policy. They're like, okay, these are your accommodations, we'll follow them. No questions asked. I have had questions asked from faculty, which can be a little bit awkward, but you are not required to answer them if they do ask. And you can always talk to someone on the staff about that. But yeah, mostly things are pretty good. Mostly the faculty I've had have been totally respectful and non-judgmental.
That's a great point, Lua. I think the kinds of questions that we would want and encourage are the questions about, like, how, right? How will we implement this accommodation in this particular educational context, right? How does this live out in this classroom setting? The questions that you do not need to engage in, and I'd like to think they would come up relatively rarely, are like, why? Right? Why do you have this accommodation? That information really is kept confidentially in the academic services office with Katie. And the memo that you share, as Katie mentioned, just lists the approved accommodations, does not list diagnoses. Christine, I have a couple questions for you about housing accommodations. Christine, the first was just about timing and when the housing application process begins. Can you give the folks a sense of timeline?
Sure. And I guess when you say housing application process, I guess you mean for a medical single or ESA. That, I believe the form is due June 1st. I don't think the welcome pages have gone out yet, correct? So I am not sure when those will be going out, but the form is on the website. Or if you want to send an email to housing, I'm happy to send you the form. We can do that. So yeah.
Great, thank you. And there were a couple of questions about medical singles. So the first is, if you can share the kinds of disabilities that might position a student to receive a medical single. And the other is about competition or access to medical singles.
I don't know. I don't think there's a list of accommodations of diagnoses that would guarantee a medical single. It's a case by case basis. Like even a medical single or a housing accommodation doesn't necessarily always mean a medical single. It could just be having a house that's closer to the dining hall or housing a house that's somewhere else. So that's an accommodation. So there's not really a checklist of things. We just kind of, like Katie was saying, get to know the student and reviewing their information and taking it from there. And I don't know the competition question. I'm not quite sure how to answer that. I guess if something came up in the middle of the term and you decided to apply for a medical single and it was approved, but we didn't have any space to move you into a medical single, that would be an issue. But I'm not quite sure if I understand the competition question. And I had answered another student's question, but I can't remember what the question was. So, somebody had said they have if they had a rare condition or something, and getting the professional who deals with this to fill out the form might be a little tricky because they're busy. I mean, I would like that person to start with the form, and if there's other doctors or people that you see, they could send supporting documents like a letter or so on and so forth that we could add to your case file.
And you are reminding me of what feels like an important part of this process. Obviously, the paperwork, the documentation needs to be complete, but it is also, that's not the stopping point of this process, right? That often initiates further conversation, either with Katie or with the folks in student life, as you continue to identify the limitation and the thing that might help support access as a result.
Correct. Yes.
Couple quick questions that maybe I can answer. Someone, one of our participants has asked if accommodations are required for seeing therapists on campus. And the answer is absolutely not. You know, Bennington, it's one of the things I'm actually really quite proud of about Bennington is that we have a long history of acknowledging the benefit of self-examination, self-reflection, an engaged process with a professional for a deeper level of understanding in support of, like, understanding of self in support of the individual's academic interests. And so it is a service that is available to all Bennington students. And the office, the Counseling and Psychological Services office has actually made some good strides over the last several years to improve access to all students who want to be able to engage in some sort of therapeutic practice or mental health support. So there are options available for folks to see a therapist on campus, but there are also telehealth options and sort of text-based, online-based services that Bennington students can access at any point during the term. Bear with me 1 minute. I want to make sure we're catching all of your questions. Kate, I think you answered this in the chat, but it might be helpful for everyone to know. Someone was concerned that they might have missed a conversation about registration. And can you share how folks can access that information if they weren't able to attend that session earlier this week?
Absolutely. So we did, we advertised a session called Navigating the Curriculum, and the marketing and invitations went out directly to students. So I think a parent was in touch thinking, oh no, have I missed it? You didn't. You're okay. But it was on Tuesday evening this past week, and it's actually going to be sent to students, the recording and a kind of a summary of the chat. The questions that were asked and answered in the chat will be sent to students in an email tomorrow, along with the course registration form and some other resources to help fill out the course registration form. But I did put in the chat the link to, we have it on our YouTube channel, the link to the recording, if anyone would like to see it there. And certainly if you have any questions, if you can't access any of this, if you email academicservices@bennington.edu, I'm keeping a close eye on that and would be happy to send anything to you directly.
Thank you. I have two more questions that I think are going to head more directly to Katie. They're related to particular accommodations, wondering about how you might work with and how we might support students with sensory issues and learning disabilities. And then I'll follow up in a minute with a question about documentation.
That's a great question. And just like for any disability or limiting condition, we would work together to learn, what accommodations have you used in the past? What strategies have you used in the past? And then to determine what supports you need for access at Bennington. And in addition to that, then what strategies or supports you need in addition to accommodations. So again, accommodations sit in this larger web of support, but they're very individualized, and we would talk one-on-one about what you need.
Thanks, Katie. And then a couple quick questions about documentation. So one of our participants asked if a school psychiatrist did your IEP, can they send that in and as documentation? And also a question about a 504 plan. Is that an adequate documentation of a student's learning disability?
Yeah. So typically an IEP or a 504 on their own would not be sufficient documentation if they're not written by a licensed healthcare professional. Again, really helpful context. So to send those alongside the documentation would be really helpful. But typically from what I've seen of 504 plans and IEPs, they really range in the level of specificity, and most of them don't include the level of specificity and the confirmation of a specific diagnosis by a healthcare professional that we would need to determine your eligibility for accommodations. The question about, if there's a psychiatrist who works at the school who had a hand in the IEP, right, that if that person is a licensed healthcare professional and is familiar with the student's limiting condition, then I would say that that's a slightly different situation, and they're welcome to fill out the documentation form or to provide a letter that articulates their recommendations for accommodations and the limitations that they've seen the student experience. As a healthcare provider, then yes, like that's fine. But if it's, I think of, myself, like I learn about students' limitations all the time, and I read a lot of documentation, but I am not a licensed healthcare professional. And so I would not feel comfortable documenting a student's disability, let's say if they were applying for accommodations elsewhere. So if it's like a guidance counselor or a learning specialist or a teacher or an administrator, typically that, that paperwork is not sufficient for the documentation that we need.
Thank you so much. I think we've answered all of our participants' questions. I wanted to open the floor just one more time to our panelists. If there are any kind of closing words or anything that we haven't gotten to through the questions that you'd like to emphasize before we close, I just want to open up the room for everyone else one more
I
time.
wanted to turn to Lua. I might have missed this, but are there any like student to student supports or any groups on campus that you've accessed yourself or know of others that have access that have been useful for people with chronic illnesses or utilizing accommodations on campus?
Yeah, so we do have a group called the Chronically Ill and Disabled Students Union, which we call SIDSU for short because that's the acronym. And yeah, we have a support group every week that anyone who feels like it would be helpful is welcome to come to. And hopefully in the fall, we'll have a couple of other fun events that students can come to.
That's so great. Thank you, Lua.
Oh, and I'll put that email in the chat.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, I just want to take one more opportunity to thank you for joining us tonight in this conversation. Please know that this is, just the beginning of these relationships and these processes here at Bennington. And so if you have questions that arise after we close, please feel free to reach out via email, and we'd be happy to follow up with you individually afterward. So thank you again for joining us. Thanks to my colleagues and our panelists tonight. And we all very much look forward to welcoming you to Bennington for the fall term. Have a good night. Thanks.
Good night.